It is worth noting that Onimusha 2 kind of has like an identity crisis. It almost feels like the game, as stated before, right? It has like survival horror, it has the action, adventure, it has the hack and slash. And on top of that, the issue that I have with it is that it tried to lean a lot into the RPG kind of side, especially with like the four companions. But I think this is probably the weakest part of this game, in my opinion, because it almost felt underbaked. Now, before we get started with the video, I do have to preface that this is actually the first time I've ever played Onimusha 2 Samurai's Destiny. And I have to say that honestly, this game was fantastic. For some weird reason, growing up as a kid, I never saw Onimusha 2 or even 1 on shelves like at the store. For those of you that don't know, I actually grew up playing Onimusha 3, and then obviously I did pick up the remaster in 2019 and recently got a platinum for it in anticipation for the new Onimusha that's actually coming out next year. So, and obviously with the remaster that was also announced, which is what we're covering in today's video. So it makes me so happy that Onimusha is getting attention again. I also have to give a huge shout out to Capcom for actually providing me a code, an early look at Onimusha 2. This is actually the first time I've ever received such an early look at a game. But when it comes to transparency for this review, I do have to state that Capcom did actually ask me not to spoil the game for you guys. So this is actually going to be a spoiler-free review of Onimusha 2 Remaster. But basically Capcom asked me not to showcase any kind of like big story arcs or any like character plots. Also, they asked me not to showcase like the ending of the game. And they also asked me not to showcase any of like the special outfits on top of that. So I'm not going to be talking about those things in today's video. And for those of you that don't know what Onimusha is, it's essentially Resident Evil, but with samurais and like Japanese mythology, like demons. But in 1997, Yoshiki Okamoto basically had an idea of having a game where there was a bunch of ninjas in a ninja house that was basically filled with a bunch of booby traps that was going to be similar to Resident Evil 1. And that's where obviously Onimusha, the series, actually spawns. So if you are a Resident Evil fan, I highly recommend it. But the general gist of every Onimusha game is you get to play as a samurai warrior who has the abilities of an Oni slash demon, and he's able to kill demons. But on top of that, he's also able to kind of steal their souls, and he's able to become more powerful. So it's kind of a story about a good samurai versus the evil demon empire. Hence the reason why this game is actually called Onimusha, aka Demon Warrior. And in this game, you actually play as a samurai named Jubei Yagyu, who's trying to seek revenge for his fallen town. And on top of that, you're also accompanied by 4 warriors. And what makes this game very interesting is that this is actually the first time that Capcom ended up using the likeness of a deceased actor that was actually super famous in Japan during the 1970s and 1980s by the name of Yusaku Matsuda. And what's interesting about this is that Capcom is doing the same thing for their sequel. They're kind of bringing this tradition back of using a very famous actor from the past and kind of using their likeness for the new game that's actually going to be releasing next year called Onimusha Way of the Sword. They're actually bringing the likeness of Toshiro Mifune, who's super famous in the Akira Kurosawa movies, like for example, Yojimbo. So for starters, I definitely want to talk about the things that I really liked. We'll then go over the nitpicks, and then we'll go with my final review score. The first thing that I actually have to talk about that I really enjoyed about this game was the fact that near the beginning section of the game, it kind of was very familiar to me. It reminded me a lot of kind of like old like 1960s, 1970s like kung fu movies, that had like Jackie Chan, for example. Not because the main character is very similar to Jackie Chan, which is true, but obviously he does also look like the actor that we just mentioned, Yusaku Matsuda, right? No, but what I actually kind of noticed was the kind of relationships between the companions and how they spoke with each other. I don't know, I just got the vibe of like old kung fu movies, but I don't know, maybe that's me, but I really love that. I don't know if that was on purpose. That's not something that I felt in Onimusha 3 or Onimusha Warlords Remaster, but it's a very interesting thing that I picked up on and I really enjoyed. On top of that, another thing that I actually have to talk about is the fact that the game lets you play on the hardest difficulty right from the get-go. Now, this is something that a lot of games don't do for some weird reason. They don't allow you to do this. They'll actually have you play through the whole game on normal, and then hard mode or extra hard mode actually gets unlocked, right? Not for this game. This game literally lets you play on any of the modes right from the get-go, which is freaking fantastic. So you can play on normal, you can play on easy, you can play on hard, right? Well, actually, I'm not even sure if you can play on easy. Maybe I'm tripping. I don't know. I don't play games on easy. So, but since this was my first time playing Onimusha, it was hard. I'm not going to lie. Like there was 2 sections that I actually got stuck on. And as mentioned, I'm not going to go into those sections in detail, but the only kind of hint that I'll give is that there was an umbrella boss. That freaking boss freaking sucked. All right. And it's not like the boss sucked. It was mostly that I actually screwed up. Since this game is kind of like a survival horror, kind of, action horror, action adventure, kind of RPG hack and slash type of a game. But that survival horror aspect of kind of resource managing, that's something that I actually, wasn't really too focused on because I forgot that I was playing on hard. I don't know what happened. But yeah, I just didn't have enough herbs to actually progress through that boss. And I didn't know that boss was actually that hard. So that ended up happening to me, I guess. Well, it was mostly just that section. And later on, I could actually just load back and, get herbs and kind of just save them. The other thing worth noting as well is that this game is not that expensive. It's literally just $30 USD, or I guess $29.99. But, Capcom could have easily actually put the price of the game to like an easy 60, kind of like what Oblivion Remaster did, or even 80, right? There's some remasters that like to do that, like Last of Us Part 1, like literally like a brand new game, which I don't recommend, obviously, but they definitely could have brought it up to 60. But the fact that it's $30 is fantastic, in my opinion. You know what I mean? Like that's something I definitely wanted to mention, just because that does kind of alter my review score. The fact that, Capcom could have easily have put another $30 on that price tag, but decided, you know what, we'll ease back on it. We'll put it back. And kind of talking about that is the fact that this game is really good looking. This is probably the best way to play Onimusha 2, and that's coming from experience. Actually, before this game got announced, I did play just like the initial kind of sequence, like the initial part of the game, and I was actually thinking of streaming it, but I was using a fan mod on an emulator, and one of the things that the fan mod just couldn't do was actually make the backgrounds HD. So they could only make the characters HD, but not the backgrounds. On top of that, the widescreen wasn't, the best on the emulator that I was using. So, but going back to what I was saying, this is the best way to play and enjoy this game, in my honest opinion. Like the game looks freaking fantastic. And since I'm talking about how good the game, like the base game looks, the other thing that I also have to mention is the freaking cutscenes. Dude, the cutscenes look freaking amazing. I think out of all the cutscenes, the only one that was kind of like, this didn't really age well, or you know what, it's not that it didn't age well. It's mostly, it kind of reminded me of something else that occurred in like the early 2000s, but that's specifically with the character Eke. That shows up at the beginning. His like arms and stuff, like the way his arms are and his legs and like the spear and all of that, like his body motions, it kind of reminded me of like Shrek, like the early access version, I guess, like the work in progress Shrek. I don't know if you guys have ever seen that, but it showed like Shrek with his like wobbly arms. That's the only time where I was like, okay, this is definitely in 2002. But aside from that, every other cutscene that shows up in this game is freaking beautiful. Honestly, it's kind of crazy that this game came out back in 2002. Like I said at the beginning, this is the first time that I've ever experienced Onimusha 2, and seeing that this game just looks so amazing. Like, again, I don't want to spoil anything, but I'll just say like the water, for example. The water looks freaking beautiful in this game, like the cutscene wise. So that's all I'll say. Again, I don't want to get into spoiler territory. And the last thing that I have to mention when it comes to things that I really liked about this game is it definitely feels like a sequel. And by that, I mean that it's like better and, stronger than the last one. I guess without getting into spoils, from the get-go, it does almost a really good job of overwhelming you with new enemies. It is worth noting too, if you've played any of the Onimusha games, every enemy has like a different kind of pairing, kind of like a way of pairing them, or I guess not a way of pairing them, but they all have different tactics for each enemy variation. And so the fact that this game just gives you so much of different enemy variations as opposed to like the first one, it's almost like just a double of what the first game when it comes to enemy types, which is just fantastic. And I guess kind of going back to what I was saying, that's what I kind of feel is like stronger and better than just the first one. So I thought Onimusha 2 did a really great job with just enemy variations in this one. Anyways, now we'll actually go into one of my biggest problems for this game. I do have a nitpick section, but I think this probably is a lot bigger. So I'll kind of have this on its own sections, but this isn't a problem that I have with the remaster per se. This is mostly an issue issue that I have with just Onimusha 2. And I think that this actually hinders kind of like my ranking of like which is the best Onimusha game in my opinion. But that has to do with Onimusha 2's kind of RPG kind of thing that it added. It is worth noting that Onimusha 2 kind of has like an identity crisis. It almost feels like the game, I stated before, right? It has like survival horror, it has the action, adventure, it has the hack and slash. And on top of that, the issue that I have with it is that it tried to lean a lot into the RPG kind of side, especially with like the 4 companions. But I think this is probably the weakest part of this game, in my opinion, because it almost felt underbaked. Honestly, it felt like the devs needed more time to cook to kind of, fix all of the RPG elements. And by RPG elements, I'm mostly talking about like the fact that, you have to give gifts to your companions, the fact that, you can't really decide which companion goes with you on whatever like story mission that you're doing. It's not like an RPG in the sense that you can pick like, oh, this companion or that companion to come with me to do the story. Since Onimusha doesn't run like that, right? It's more like Resident Evil where you have to just go from A to B, right? And sometimes, Resident Evil has especially the OGs, it has that tendency of kind of running into like previous companions. And for this game, that happens, but you can't really decide what companions show up at what time. It's mostly dependent on like a likability meter per se. Like it's more like a like meter that every kind of companion has. And so you kind of have to just give gifts to a certain companion, and you have to catch like certain cutscenes with companions, or else you just won't see that companion, except for when it comes to like one of the companions which is super important to the story. But I can't go over that. But aside from that companion, all the other companions, you can just, I guess, like not really do like their side story. So it's very weird because, like I said, it almost feels like the game wanted to have like multiple side stories, like with Oyu, right? With Eke, with Magoichi, with Kotaro. But even when my first time playing the game, I wasn't really too familiar with this RPG kind of quality because none of the other Onimusha games had this. Well, I haven't played Dawn of Dreams Onimusha Dawn of Dreams. I've only played the third one and the first one and obviously this one now, but none of the other games, to my knowledge, like had that weird RPG kind of mechanic or like the like meter with your companions. And it just, like I said, it felt underbaked. I think this kind of mechanic would fit really well if we went back in time and had the devs, had more time with it, but I guess it could kind of be fixed if this game were to get a remake, which I definitely think is a possibility, especially since, we're getting a sequel to Onimusha. And in my personal opinion, I kind of have a theory that if the new sequel does really fantastic, I'm assuming Capcom might start remaking Onimusha, kind of like what they're doing with Resident Evil, right? So that's always on the table, but again, no confirmation on that. But going back to what I was saying, this RPG mechanic was probably the weakest in my opinion. And even in my personal playthrough, like as mentioned, I like never saw Kotaro. Like I literally did not see the ninja companion at all. I only saw him at the beginning once, and I think I missed like part of his like cutscenes or whatever from like not going in like a specific area or not giving him enough sufficient gifts. At the end of the game, it kind of tells you how much of the game you've actually completed. And I think I got like 60%. So there's like 40% of stuff that I literally missed with, companions. And one could also make the counter argument that, oh, okay, well, it's, it has a lot of replayability. And like, yeah, that's great. But I also would have liked it if it was a little more organized. You know what I mean? Like things that could have helped a lot is if there was like a base location in the game where you could always go back to, and you can kind of decide who do you want to go through this mission with. Because, I think one of the great things that the companions do in the game is that they really do a great job of helping you or kind of opening up enemies. Like for example, one of the characters will shoot or something, right? Or another character will slice and the enemy will get distracted, and then you can go in for like a finisher, right? Or like use your magic abilities, stuff like that, right? But the weird thing is that's dependent on how much a character likes. Like they could pop in, or if you're really sucking like really badly, you're getting your butt kicked in an area. Sometimes like your most liked character companion will show up and kind of save you, but then he'll just leave sometimes. And it just felt like kind of like Resident Evil and then kind of like an RPG at times. And it just felt like it just kept like butting heads with each other. You know what I mean? So I don't know if I'm making myself understood. Let me know down in the comments if you guys also had this issue, but this was probably the biggest problem that I had with Onimusha 2. That's why I didn't really want to keep it in the nitpick section because, nitpicks are very small issues I have with the game. But this one, I think it's such a big problem for me that, and honestly, it doesn't really like, I really enjoyed this game. Like, I have to state that, but I do think that this weird RPG kind of identity crisis that it had does kind of bring it down from the ranking system. I guess the ranked Onimusha games, in my opinion. By the way, if you guys are enjoying this content, make sure to let me know by leaving a like, and also let me know if you guys want me to make more Onimusha content. But anyways, let's move on to the nitpick section. And for starters, the first thing that I have to mention has to do with more of like the control of the character in game. This is something that really occurs when you're kind of switching out of weapons. For example, like you'll be fighting a mini boss or a boss in the game, and you'll switch from one weapon to a different weapon so that you can use your magic, right? So that you can do extra damage to the boss. As you're switching, like for example, if I have the katana or whatever, and then I switch to like, I don't know, the spear, for instance, when you switch to a different weapon and then you go back in game, because the game also gives you the option of kind of putting your weapon in your back and then kind of switching from there. But obviously it's very slow when you're like in the middle of a boss fight. So I guess the strat would be, the recommended strat would be to just, press pause, switch your weapons and go back. But an issue that I kept running into is that, for example, if you're in a mid boss fight and a boss kind of throws something at you or punches you or whatever, or you're far away and they lunge at you and you want to block that, for some weird reason, when you press start and switch to another weapon and then press block right after going back in game, the block doesn't register. For some weird reason. I don't know why that happens, but that basically cost me a lot of health. And especially since I'm playing on hard for the very first time, that was not fun when, like I switched the weapon to kind of do major damage to a boss, and then the boss, goes in for a hit, and me switching my weapon and then trying to block just doesn't register. So I just get knocked out. I just get punched in the face. Like, that doesn't help. And kind of along those lines as well, the other thing that I have to mention as well is that there is almost like, without spoiling the game, there is kind of like a rage mode. Like if you guys have ever played God of War, you basically press L3 and R3 and you go into a rage. It's similar with Onimusha. You kind of, without spoiling, you do get kind of OP, and pressing L2 and R2 is how you activate it. And for some weird reason, it does not work like all the time. Like, it just doesn't register.
60% of the time it works. Every time.
You kind of have to do it maybe twice or 3 times, especially if you're like in the heat of battle, which again is so annoying, because if you're playing on hard and you get hit, you know what I mean, for something dumb like that, it's not even your fault. It's more like the game just doesn't register the L2 and R2, or like, as mentioned before, like you switch the weapon and you try to block or whatever, and it doesn't work. Like it's at that point, it's not my fault, right? So I don't know if the OG game had this issue as well. Maybe this was just an old problem and it kind of just stayed with the remaster. And the last nitpick that I actually have to mention, and because honestly, there's not that many that I had with the game. I thought the game was fantastic, but I do have to say I was kind of disappointed in the fact that the game didn't give you access to Japanese audio and English subtitles. Now, correct me if I'm wrong. Maybe I just didn't, find the right option in the game. But looking back at Onimusha Warlords, they had, the ability to kind of switch from Japanese voice acting or English dub voice acting. So I don't know. I was kind of just already kind of expecting that this game would have the same options. Like, I would have liked to have played, one of my playthroughs in the English dub and another playthrough in the Japanese, OG dub, right? But I don't know. I thought it was strange that this game just didn't have that. You know what I mean? Like, as mentioned, it was just disappointing. So it's not a big issue. This is just a nitpick. But I guess that kind of leads us to the final section of the video, which is my review score, right? What do I give Onimusha 2 Remaster? I got to say, I had a fantastic experience with this game. As stated several times in this video, this is my first ever experience with Onimusha, and you know what, I can kind of see why a lot of people think that this is actually their favorite game. I wouldn't say that it's a bad Onimusha game. I definitely think that this game has a lot to add to Onimusha. Like I said, the only real issue that I had with this game that kind of just brings it down in the ranks of like my favorite Onimusha game is the RPG element. I think, as mentioned, if that would have gotten cooked a little bit better, like if it had time in the oven a little bit longer, I think this game would have probably been my favorite. But since this was back in 2002 and, that's just not the case, maybe in a remake, But I think for me, I do feel comfortable in giving this game an 8.5 out of 10. And I guess the other thing too that I really enjoyed, or I guess since I've only played it, I've only beaten it once since recording this video. One thing that I kind of didn't really, highlight before was that there is a ton of replayability. I kind of touched upon this a little bit earlier on, kind of stating that at the end of the game, it kind of tells you how much of the game you've basically completed and how much, you missed out. And as mentioned, I got 60% done. So it kind of just, makes the player want to replay the game, because there's 40%, that's almost half of the game that I basically missed, which kind of sucks. But it sucks that I missed it in the first playthrough, but it's awesome that the game obviously kind of tells you, and as mentioned, it kind of just makes you want to play the game more. And so I'll definitely be doing that. And just so you guys know, I am planning on streaming this game when it fully releases, so stay tuned for that. And also I am planning on making content for this game, but click these videos if you guys want to see that. But anyways, thanks for watching.